The easiest way to checkmate your opponent is by attacking the most vulnerable square in their position, which is the f7 pawn. And that's also the doorway to your opponent's king. In today's video, we're going to be covering how you can make use of this attacking idea of these tactics in 10 of the most common chess openings. Let's start it off with the Scandinavian Defense, which is extremely popular on amateur level. After pawn takes, black usually recaptures with their queen, following up with knight to c3, attacking this queen on d5, forcing the queen to go away, and then we go knight to f3, propelling black at some point to play bishop g4. And there's very common tactics here that you can utilize. If let's say black goes bishop g4 right now, or after knight to f6, and you play bishop c4, and if at some point black goes bishop to g4, that enables you to utilize a very cool tactics. You can play knight to e5, and all of a sudden you allow black to capture your queen here on d1. You say, hey, I don't care about the pain, go ahead and take my queen, because if that happens, you can then checkmate black in one move by bishop takes f7, and it is so unexpected that very often even strong opponents fall for these tactics. So the big takeaway actually from this is that whenever you play a game of chess, let's take a couple moves back, if you ever want to play bishop g4 yourself, or if your opponent plays that move, you're gonna always watch over this idea of either knight to e5 first or bishop takes f7 first, followed by knight to e5 with a double attack to the king and bishop. Because in many different openings, it actually works in white's favor and allows white to win instantaneously. And the next trap comes out of the Scotch Gambit, where after knight to f3 and knight of c6, you play pawn to d4, kind of pretending like you just want to trade in the middle of the board, but after pawn takes, you change your mind, and instead of knight takes d4, you go into the wild horse variation knight to g5. I don't know if it's called wild horse variation or not, but why not? The point is, this knight is somewhat annoying for black. It puts some pressure over here. Maybe you want to play bishop c4 and adds more attack here to black's f7 pawn. And many would be tempted to play pawn to h6 here, trying to get rid of that knight. But then all of a sudden you sacrifice this knight over here on f7, and after king takes, you follow up with bishop to c4 anyway, checking to the king. And the most common response of black is actually trying to get the king back to safety by playing king to e8, which is in fact a losing error, because then you play queen h5 with a tempo, check to the king, which is kind of like the scholar's checkmate, almost. Queen to f7 check, king d6 is forced, and now you have a couple of ways to win the game. For example, bishop f4 is one of them, attacking the king, forcing it to move, and then it's not a too far away journey to checkmate black. Now, there could be some other sidelines that black may take here. I've got another video where I analyze this particular variation in greater detail, so if you're going to use that, I would recommend that you check it out later. The next trap is really universal. It works against any opponent. Here you start off with the move knight to f3, trying to drag black into your territory. Here's the point. Usually black plays either pawn d5 or pawn e5 on the first move. And by playing knight to f3, you take away one of these two options, leaving black with nothing but pawn to d5. And as black plays that, you're willing to gambit your pawn here on a4. As black accepts the gambit, you then play knight g5, aiming to recapture the pawn, so black thinks, okay, let me defend it now, knight to f6. You play pawn d3, kind of attacking this pawn once again, but after pawn takes, which is something usually black does happily, because that's an extra pawn, and now black doesn't have to worry about defending it anymore, so they're happy to trade it. Bishop takes d3. Currently black is a pawn up, but you still have some attacking pieces putting some pressure on black, which very often makes black think that they should play pawn to h6, getting rid of this knight. But once again, it's a losing error, and now you have a really nice combo, knight takes f7. With the attack of black's queen and rook, forcing black to recapture, which enables another nice and powerful shot, bishop to g6, which is a check to the king, and a discover attack of this queen on d8, meaning that on the next move you're going to grab the queen, and black's king is still going to be deadly exposed so that you can keep attacking it. You also attack here all around. Just one little note to be made is that if black ever goes knight to c6, do not take this pawn on c7, your queen can get in trouble there. It's just better to move it back to d1 or d3, whatever, and you keep attacking, you have extra material, and you have a winning game. Besides, you can use the same tactics as black. If white goes pawn to d4, you play knight f6, playing solidly, but after c4, you then sacrifice your pawn on e5. And you can notice the similarity between the previous line and this one. This time we're just using basically the same idea as black. So we're gambiting this pawn on e5, after pawn captures, we go knight g4, aiming to recapture it. After white plays knight to f3, we play pawn to d6, attacking this pawn once again. It's basically all the same stuff. The little difference with the previous variations that we're using it with black, and white has their pawn on c4, but that doesn't change anything. So pawn to h3, we still take knight to f2 check with all the same ideas. If white ever captures over here, we're going to play bishop g3 check, and we're going to attack this queen over there. Sometimes your opponent will notice the threat and will say, okay, let me counterattack somehow. How can I do this? Well, maybe queen to d4, but then you grab the rook. White recaptures here on g7, thinking that they have some counterattack, but it all is shut down by bishop to g3, and it turns out that this is nearly a checkmate. Your queen is cutting the king off the d file, so white would have to give up their queen for the bishop over here, and you're gonna have a completely winning game. The next trap works against the Sicilian defense. After pawn e4, pawn c5, we play knight f3, d6, so far so good, pawn d4, it's all the standard stuff, but after knight f6, black wants to enter probably the knight variation or the dragon variation, maybe the Scheveningen variation or whatever, but instead of the normal move, which would defend this pawn on e4, we pretend like we just ignore the threat and play bishop to c4, maybe overlooking this move knight takes e4, and your opponents are highly likely to capture it because it doesn't look like white has any compensation for this pawn whatsoever. But you have this once again attack against the weak square f7 with the move queen to h5. And now your pieces are teaming up against this pawn, so we're again threatening something like scholar's checkmate. If black ever tries to kick your queen away, that is not going to go back. It's going to go over here to d5 with a double attack to the pawn and the knight, thus winning the knight on the next move, or starting this deadly attack against the king. That's losing for black. And if instead black plays pawn to e6, that also enables you to utilize some brilliant tactics. As bishop to b5 check to the king first, we just unleash this extremely powerful attack against black's king. If black covers by the bishop, then knight takes e6. Again, extremely beautiful. We're utilizing the dual pin over here, so the pawn cannot move because of the queen pinning it, and the bishop cannot move because we're pinning it to the king just as well. So although it looks like the knight should be captured, but black just cannot technically do this. And after the queen moves somewhere, in most cases they play to a5, trying to win a tempo by attacking your queen, you say, okay, I'm just going bishop to d2, and that also pushing black into one of the two sub-variations, which are both equally winning for you and are actually just quite nice. Now, first of all, we're also attacking the queen, so black should do something about that. If black wants to capture this bishop, mistakenly believing that he is a piece up currently, you then play knight to c7, and our sneaky knight could win the game for us with this fork. If instead black decides to take the other one on d2 by his knight, knight takes d2, then you have another unexpected move. You don't recapture over here, but instead you play bishop to d7, which is check to the king, and it almost clears the 5th rank for your queen to capture your opponent's queen on the next move. Once again, a very sudden and very beautiful combo. And here's how you attack the f7 square against one of the most solid defenses, the Caro-Kann defense. You can trick your opponent by playing knight to f3 instead of the mainstream move pawn to d4. Here black goes pawn to d5, you play knight to c3 defending this pawn on e4, and if black plays similar to the classical variation of the Caro-Kann defense, they will take over here on e4, and then they'll develop their bishop to f5, and trying to gain a tempo by this attack. And in the normal variation, when you have your pawn on d4 instead of this knight on f3, that works perfectly well for black. But in the current case, strangely enough, it leads to a very dangerous position for black. So first off, you play knight to g3, attacking this bishop. It goes back, then you play h4, pushing, or at least preparing for the pawn to be pushed to h5 and to attack the bishop once again. Actually, it's going to be captured, and probably black will play pawn h6 to create this escape square for the bishop. But now we gain one more tempo by chasing the same bishop by going knight to e5, which attacks the bishop. And although it is defended, but if black allows this exchange to happen, that'll ruin their pawn structure, and their king is going to be weak as well after that. Usually they're going to go bishop to h7. And then, strangely enough, well, not strangely for the subject of this video, we're playing queen h5. So we're going all the way forward, once again threatening this color's checkmate on the f7 square. And in order to defend it, black has to play an awkward move pawn to g6, which completely locks this bishop on h7 out of the game. But even after that, we can humiliate your opponent further by not moving your queen, and instead playing bishop c4, this time with the left hook. We're going to win the game after bishop takes f7. And in fact, many of your opponents will just blunder that. They'll be tempted to capture your queen, and they'll overlook bishop takes f7 checkmate. But even if they notice the threat and play pawn to e6, you can now move your queen back to e2, and you still have an extremely strong attacking position. In fact, in most cases, your opponent will play bishop g7, trying to, think out of the bishop and filling the gaps around his king side, but that fails to yet another sacrifice on f7, knight takes f7. Now that's an attack all around. If black captures, that leads to queen takes e6, check to the king. It is forced to move back, and then queen to f7. We broke through and we made this colors checkmate possible even against some very experienced opponent. Now let's talk about my favorite bishop's opening, which is an opening that I would highly recommend that you try it out for white. It starts off with the bishop's move, because it's the bishop's opening, bishop to c4. Your opponent will usually go knight to f6, trying to attack this pawn on e4, but we may ignore this and play knight to f3. Many of your opponents will say, okay, let me grab it, knight takes e4. But then you play knight to c3, and all of a sudden it turns out that in fact you're playing the Stafford Gambit with a reversed color, which, you know, should be extremely dangerous for black. If it's dangerous when you're playing it as black, it should be even more dangerous when you have an extra tempo. So after knight takes c3 and pawn takes, at the price of one pawn, you developed your army nearly completely. You have pretty much all your pieces actively involved into the game, and white is still completely passive. Oh, I'm sorry, black is still completely passive. Okay, now the immediate threat is knight takes e5. In addition to that, you also have another threat. If black defends this pawn anyhow by, let's say, pawn d6 or knight to c6, you can also go knight to g5, and after that, there is no defense for black to their pawn on f7. So that's one way for you to win. But there is also another way for you to win with a hurricane. You can take here on e5, starting a really tactical storm of black. Knight takes e5, still threatening to capture on f7 on the next move. And if black takes over here, then bishop takes here on f7. And that's another nice combo. In fact, we saw a somewhat similar idea in one of the previous traps. So we want to deflect black from defending of their queen, and after that we just win the queen, and along the way we also completely expose this king, and we are totally winning. By the way, if you enjoyed this variation and want to explore the bishop's opening further, then I've got another video, which I'll link down below in the description, and you may check it out later. Now let's go to classics, like going pawn to e5. Now after knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, we're entering one of the most common, or if not the most common position on amateur level. Here black will often go either knight to f6 or bishop to c5. If they go knight to f6, then there is a relatively well-known attack called the fried liver attack with knight to g5, and yet a ton of players will still fall for this very old trap. So with knight g5, we are attacking the square f7 with your bishop and knight from here. If black wants to cover it by d5, pawn takes. Here, if black is unaware of this line, they'll usually automatically recapture on d5, thinking they're doing good. They recapture, they open up for their queen to hit your knight, but then you have this knight takes f7 sacrifice, which is dragging black's king out of safety, and then you have a strong follow-up queen to f3 with a double attack to the king, as well as this knight on d5, which is also attacked by the bishop. And now black has a set choice, either to go back and then let you to capture this knight and to continue your attack, or if they want to hold on to this knight, they have to bite the bullet and go forward with king to e6, defending this knight, but keeping their king dangerously exposed right in the middle of the board. Then you can play knight to c3 to attack this knight once again, and after knight b4 or something else to defend this knight, you can just castle. And although you don't have a forcing checkmate here, black's position is extremely dangerous. This pin is very annoying, and overall it's difficult for black to defend it. For example, if black wants to capture here on c2, that will lose the game immediately to bishop takes d5, and, you know, black is done. For example, if king goes back, we can just keep chasing it, and after king to d6 and knight to e4, that's a nice accurate checkmate in the middle of the board. The fried liver attack is something quite familiar to most of your opponents, but there is another opening variation which is really similar to this, and pretty much nobody knows it. It starts off with the move pawn to d4, where you play kind of like the Scotch game, and then you go bishop to c4. Now the main move and the most popular move is knight to f6, and now you start playing all the same move. Instead of like castling or anything else or pawn e5, you just go knight g5, kind of getting back to that idea of attack of the f7 square. Now, what's the difference? Well, you play this move pawn d4 first and sacrifice your pawn there. Usually this will confuse your opponents. They'll think that it's something they haven't seen before, and they'll still wish to play pawn d5 to cover this weak diagonal. And after pawn takes and knight takes d5, that leads to the position very similar to the fried liver attack. Now, I do not recommend that you take here knight takes f7 right away, because black has this unpleasant counter check with their queen on e7 checking your queen. So you first want to move your king to safety, which leaves black kind of defenseless because their king is stuck there and you already have a lot of attacking ideas along the e-file and across this diagonal. For example, with bishop e7, now your classical tactics works out. Knight takes f7, the exact same tactics to the fried liver attack, king takes, and then followed by queen to f3, this double attack. And right now it's even more dangerous for black to move their king forward to e6 because now the e-file is open and you can start attacking there right away. If knight to e5, I mean, it's actually quite a nice position where both knights are pinned, down to the king, and we keep attacking. This time they start on e5. Black defends it with the bishop to f6. The following variation is gives you a nearly forcing win here, actually. It starts with the move knight to c3, attacking this knight, and also you're just free your rook from being engaged into the game. If black captures here, because they have nothing else to do anyway, you then start just breaking through the defense, eliminating all the defenders, and getting after black's king. Rook takes e5. Here you can be generous because we're going to checkmate black anyway. Rook e1 check to the king, and black is going to be checkmated very soon. For example, if the king moves forward or back, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if it goes forward, you can take here on d5, and you can see that it's not going to take long for you to checkmate the king. For example, if queen recaptures, you can do that immediately with queen to c3 checkmate. And here is the final variation for today. In this position, we have just discussed that knight to f6 of black enables you to jump with your knight over there to g5, starting this attack against the f7 square, which can be very dangerous for black. Some of your opponents will instead play bishop to c5, which also makes total sense, developing in peace and defending this pawn on d4 twice so that you can no longer capture it. But then you have another tricky variation. You pretend like you gave up on an idea to get this pawn back, and you decided just to play pawn c3 and to continue your development. But if black captures this pawn, instead of recapturing, you once again utilize the same tactics, bishop takes f7. But this time the idea is different. After king goes forward to f7, we can now follow up with queen to d5 check with a double attack to the king and the bishop. And what it does is that it simply helps us to completely expose black's king, force it to move so that it can't castle anymore, and it gives you this very obvious attack against black's king. If king goes back to e8, there is another little nuance which is worth knowing. Instead of capturing the bishop right away, it is wise to play queen to h5 first, provoking this pawn to g6 move, because it additionally weakens this long diagonal. So pawn g6, queen takes c5, and now you can see that this, in addition to the weakness of the king, black now has a bunch of weaknesses along this diagonal. For example, if they decide to, take now on b2, bishop takes b2 comes with a deadly attack along this diagonal. I mean, black can currently cover it by knight f6, but overall, their position is a mess. You can simply castle. Again, let's not forget that the king has already moved, so it cannot castle anymore. It's going to stay there in the middle of the board. And let's say they go d6 or whatever, you just move your queen away, that doesn't really matter. And pretty soon you're going to break through in the middle of the board by the move pawn e5, you're going to play your rook to e1 and start the deadly attack against black's centralized king. That's about it. That's how you win in 10 of the most common chess openings. And if you want to know how to level up your chess level overall and also how to master the middle game chess, then I recommend that you attend my free masterclass by clicking the link over there. I wish you had a great rest of the day. Take care.